Vincenzo Caruso buried his first man at 16. By 35, he'd lost count. But at 5:47 a.m., watching from his marble staircase, he witnessed something that terrified him more than any execution ever had. His son, the 8-year-old who hadn't spoken in 6 months, who still screamed for his dead mother, was striking a punching bag with the precision of a trained killer. 1, 2, 3. Clean hits. Controlled breathing. No hesitation. And behind him, arms crossed, face unreadable, stood the black woman they'd hired 3 weeks ago to scrub toilets. She wasn't comforting the boy. She was commanding him. In Vincenzo's world, touching the boss's son meant death. Giving him orders meant war. This woman had done both. And she was still breathing. What Vincenzo couldn't see from where he stood. The scar on her left wrist. Thin. Deliberate. Eye-shaped like a crescent moon. The same symbol his enemies carved into dead soldiers for 11 years. If he'd seen it, he would have put a bullet in her skull before breakfast. Instead, he just stood there. Frozen. Watching his broken son become whole. That hesitation would cost him everything. Because in 72 hours, armed men would storm this compound. His son would fight to survive. And this woman training him? She wasn't here to save him. She was preparing him for something worse. The war had already started. Vincenzo just didn't know he was losing. Before we unpack how a cleaning woman became the most dangerous person in a mafia compound, ask yourself this. What kind of woman walks into a house built on violence and doesn't flinch? What kind of past creates someone who can stare down a crime lord and refuse to back down? Here's what should keep you awake tonight. If you discovered the person healing your child was connected to the people who wanted your family dead, would you pull the trigger or wait to see what happens next? That's the choice Vincenzo was about to face. The crescent moon wasn't random. It marked child soldiers from a conflict most governments won't admit happened. The same conflict that created the mercenaries now hunting Vincenzo's organization. So was she sent to destroy them from the inside? Or running from the same people he was fighting? Did she choose this house? Or did fate put her exactly where she needed to be? And the boy, the silent, shattered 8-year-old who hadn't smiled in half a year, did he sense something his father couldn't see? Or was he just desperate enough to trust anyone who treated him like he mattered? One thing was certain. The truth would come out. And when it did, it would rewrite everything they knew about loyalty, survival, and what it really means to protect the people you love. Vincenzo Caruso wasn't born into power. He took it with blood. At 16, he watched his father executed in a basement for skimming money. At 23, he made those same executioners disappear. By 35, he controlled shipping routes, politicians, and enough fear to keep an entire city compliant. He didn't raise his voice. He just showed up. Men twice his age called him sir. Judges signed papers without reading them. But all that power meant nothing the night his wife died. Isabella wasn't supposed to be in the car. The hit was meant for Vincenzo, a rival faction settling an old score with bullets and shattered glass. She'd taken his keys that morning because his driver called in sick. Buckled their 8-year-old son Marco into the back seat. Smiled at him in the rearview mirror. Told him they'd get gelato after picking up his father. She never made it. The shooters didn't check who was driving. They just opened fire. Marco watched his mother's head snap forward. Watched the red spray across the windshield. Watched her hand slip off the wheel as the car veered into concrete. He didn't scream. Didn't cry. Just sat there, silent, staring, while sirens closed in. When Vincenzo arrived at the hospital, doctors told him his wife was gone. His son was physically unharmed, but the boy didn't speak, didn't react, just stared past everyone like he was looking at something no one else could see. That was 6 months ago. Vincenzo tried everything. The best child psychologists in Europe. Play therapy, art therapy, experimental treatments, a team of trauma specialists. Nothing worked. Marco ate when food appeared, slept when lights went out, but he didn't talk, didn't play, didn't laugh. He just existed, a ghost in a body that survived. Vincenzo threw money at the problem like he solved every other crisis. But you can't buy back a child's voice. can't purchase their smile, can't negotiate with grief. The mansion became a tomb. Staff whispered through marble halls, afraid noise would shatter whatever fragile peace held the household together. Vincenzo stopped hosting meetings at home. The business continued, but its heart had gone cold. At night, he'd stand outside Marco's door, listening to shallow breathing, wondering if his son was dreaming or if even sleep had become another empty routine. He thought about revenge constantly, tracked down the shooters, made them suffer in ways that would have impressed his enemies. But killing them didn't bring Isabella back, didn't fix Marco, didn't stop the nightmares or fill the silence. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. A woman showed up at the service entrance asking for work. Her name was Amara. No last name, no references, no history she'd discuss. Just calm, steady presence and willingness to start immediately. The head housekeeper almost turned her away. They didn't need staff, didn't take walk-ins, and certainly didn't hire people with no background. But something about Amara made her pause. Maybe it was the way she stood. Back straight, eyes level, like she'd spent her life carrying weight that would have crushed most people. Maybe it was quiet confidence when she said she wasn't afraid of hard work. Or maybe it was desperation. The household was fracturing under grief's weight, and they needed someone who wouldn't crumble. So the housekeeper hired her, gave her the worst jobs: bathrooms, laundry, scrubbing floors in the East Wing where Isabella's belongings sat boxed and untouched. Amara didn't complain, didn't ask questions. She just worked and watched. She noticed Marco wandering halls at odd hours, always alone, saw how staff avoided him, unsure how to interact with a child wrapped in that much trauma. Observed Vincenzo's late-night visits to his son's room, standing in the doorway but never going inside, like he was afraid of making things worse. One morning, Amara found Marco sitting on the library floor, staring at a chessboard his mother gave him for his 7th birthday. Pieces were set up but untouched. He wasn't playing, just looking. Amara didn't sit down beside him, didn't use a soft voice or try coaxing conversation. She just walked past, paused, and said, "Your mother taught you that game because she wanted you to think 3 moves ahead. Staring won't help. You have to move." Then she kept walking. Marco didn't respond. But the next day one of the pawns had moved. It was the smallest shift, but it was something. Before we see how this becomes something bigger, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning. But Vincenzo had been up all night handling a logistics issue. 3 shipping containers held at port because someone hadn't greased the right palms. By the time he got home, the sun was barely up, and the house should have been silent. Instead, he heard voices in the courtyard. One was his son's, the other was hers. Vincenzo moved to the window and stopped cold. Marco stood in the center of the stone courtyard, barefoot, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, his small frame tense with concentration. In his hands was a wooden staff, one of the decorative pieces that hung in the armory for years. Across from him, arms crossed, face completely neutral, was Amara. She wasn't smiling, wasn't encouraging him with the therapist's overly cheerful tone. She was just watching him struggle to hold the staff steady, and when his grip slipped, she said, "Again." Not mean, not soft, just firm. Marco adjusted his hands, tried again. The staff wobbled. Feet wider. Marco shifted his stance. "Breathe through your nose, out through your mouth. Don't hold it." Marco exhaled shakily but obeyed. Again. Vincenzo's hand went to his waistband, muscle memory reaching for the gun he always carried. Who the hell did this woman think she was? In his world, there were rules. The help didn't speak unless spoken to. They didn't take initiative. And they sure as hell didn't put hands on the boss's child without permission. This wasn't helping. This was overstepping, insubordination. And in his house, that had consequences. He moved fast, footsteps echoing across courtyard stones. Amara saw him coming but didn't flinch, didn't drop her arms, didn't step back. Marco froze, the staff slipping from his hands and clattering to the ground. His eyes went wide, familiar fear creeping back. but Amara placed a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "Pick it up." Marco hesitated, glancing between his father and the woman who'd been drilling him for 20 minutes. "Pick it up," Amara repeated, and Marco did. Vincenzo stopped 3 feet away, voice low and deadly. "What do you think you're doing?" Amara met his gaze without flinching. "Teaching him to stand. You don't touch my son. I haven't hurt him. That's not the point." Vincenzo's voice could cut steel. "You don't give him orders. You don't take him outside without permission. You clean floors. That's what you were hired to do." Amara didn't raise her voice, didn't apologize. She just looked at him with the kind of calm that only comes from surviving worse than anything he could threaten her with. "You're raising a survivor," she said evenly. "I'm raising someone who can stand." The silence that followed was suffocating. Vincenzo stared at her, searching for the fear he was used to seeing when he got this close. It wasn't there. She wasn't defiant, wasn't cocky, just certain, like she'd already made peace with whatever happened next. Marco stood between them, gripping the staff, breathing still uneven, eyes locked on his father's face, waiting. And that's when Vincenzo saw it. For the first time in 6 months, his son looked present. Not lost, not distant. Alert. Focused. Alive. Vincenzo's hand moved away from his waistband. "Inside. Now." Amara nodded once, then turned to Marco. "Same time tomorrow. Don't forget your breathing." Marco nodded too, and as he walked past his father toward the house, Vincenzo caught something he hadn't seen in half a year. The faintest ghost of a smile pulling at the corner of his son's mouth. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but it had been there. Real. Undeniable. Vincenzo turned back to Amara, jaw tight. "We're not done." "I know," she said. Then she picked up the staff, returned it to the wall, and walked back inside like nothing had happened. The training became routine. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., before the household stirred, Marco slipped out and met Amara in the courtyard. She was always there first. Waiting. Arms at her sides. Face calm. She didn't greet him with warmth. Didn't ask how he slept. She just nodded, handed him the staff, and said, "Show me what you remember." The first week, Marco could barely hold the staff without his arms shaking. His grip was weak, stance wrong. He'd overcompensate, lean too far forward, lose balance. Amara corrected him each time, not harshly, but without softness either. Feet apart, shoulders back, eyes forward. If you're looking at the ground, you've already lost. Marco would adjust, try again, fail again, but he kept going. Because Amara didn't pity him. She expected him to improve, and that expectation, that demand for effort, was the first time in 6 months someone treated him like he was capable of something other than breaking. By the second week, his hands stopped shaking. His stance stabilized. He could hold the staff for minutes without wobbling. Amara introduced movement. "Step forward with your left foot. Sweep right. Recover." Marco stumbled, tried again, stumbled. I tried again. She didn't praise him when he got it right, just moved to the next drill. Faster. Again. Breathe. Again. The sessions lasted 30 minutes, never longer, just enough to push him without overwhelming him. And when they finished, Amara would take the staff, return it to the wall, and say, "Same time tomorrow." Then she'd disappear into the house to start her actual work. Marco never asked why she was doing this, never questioned her methods. He just showed up. Every single morning, no matter how tired, no matter how sore. He showed up because for the first time since his mother died, someone was asking him to be strong instead of fragile. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere shifted. Staff noticed Marco's changes. He started joining them for breakfast instead of eating alone. He'd nod when spoken to, and sometimes even answer in short sentences. Nothing elaborate, just acknowledgments. But it was progress. The housekeeper mentioned it to Vincenzo one evening. "The boy seems better, sir. More present." Vincenzo didn't respond. just stared out the window toward the courtyard where morning sessions happened. His silence spoke volumes. He was caught between instinct and result. Every fiber of his being told him to shut this down, to remind everyone who was in charge, to assert control the way he always had. But Marco was changing, healing, and Vincenzo couldn't ignore that. Still, it gnawed at him. The not knowing. Who was Amara, really? Why was she here? And why did a woman hired to scrub toilets move like someone trained to fight? He started investigating. Quietly. He had people run background checks, a search for records, anything that would explain her. They came back empty. No criminal history, no employment records beyond 3 weeks, no family, no address before she appeared at the service entrance. It was as if she'd materialized from nothing. That wasn't normal. In Vincenzo's world, people left traces. Everyone did, unless they'd been erased, or unless they were hiding. One night, he confronted her directly, found her in the laundry room folding linens, movements efficient and methodical. "I want to know who you are," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Amara didn't look up. "I'm the person cleaning your house." "That's not what I asked." She folded another sheet, set it on the pile, then finally looked at him. "You want to know if I'm a threat. Are you?" Her expression didn't change. "If I wanted to hurt your son, I wouldn't be teaching him how to defend himself." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Vincenzo's jaw tightened. He could force the issue. Have her removed, interrogated, made to talk. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him without fear. Maybe it was the fact that Marco was improving. Or maybe it was the exhaustion of 6 months spent failing to fix what felt unfixable. He stepped closer, voice lower. "If I find out you're lying to me, there won't be a place on this planet you can hide." Amara met his gaze. "I'm not lying. I'm just not telling you everything." "Why not?" "Because you're not ready to hear it." And with that, she picked up the basket of folded linens and walked past him, leaving Vincenzo standing alone, more frustrated than he'd been in years. But the truth was starting to leak through the cracks. One morning, Vincenzo noticed something. A scar on Amara's wrist. Thin, deliberate, shaped like a crescent moon. He'd seen that mark before. On bodies pulled from rivers. On prisoners interrogated in basements. On soldiers who fought in conflicts that weren't supposed to exist. It was a brand. A symbol used by a militant group that operated in war zones most governments refused to acknowledge. A group that trained children to fight, to survive, to kill if necessary. Vincenzo's blood went cold. If Amara had that mark, it meant one of two things. She'd been one of the soldiers, or she'd been one of the children they'd taken. Either way, it connected her to the same network of mercenaries currently targeting his organization. The same people who'd likely ordered the hit that killed Isabella. He should have confronted her immediately, should have dragged the truth out of her, but he didn't. Because Marco was thriving, and Vincenzo couldn't reconcile the woman teaching his son discipline and control with the possibility that she was connected to his enemies. Outside the mansion, threats were intensifying. Informants reported unusual activity, rival factions moving resources, mercenaries being contracted. Something was building. Vincenzo's security team recommended increased patrols, extra guards, tighter protocols. He approved everything. But he also knew that if someone wanted to get inside, they'd find a way. They always did. The question wasn't if an attack was coming. It was when, and whether his son would survive it. Marco, unaware of danger circling outside the gates, continued training. By the 4th week, he could execute full sequences, staff work, footwork, breathing drills. Amara had introduced hand-to-hand basics, how to fall without getting hurt, how to block, how to move when someone bigger and stronger came at you. "You're not trying to win fights," she told him one morning. "You're trying to survive long enough to run. That's the goal. Always." Marco nodded, absorbed it, internalized it. One afternoon, one of the older staff members made a comment in the kitchen. Something dismissive about Marco's training. Called it a waste of time. Said the boy should be in therapy, not playing soldier. Marco, who'd been passing through, stopped. Turned, Phil looked the man directly in the eye and said, "I'm not playing." It was the first time he'd defended himself verbally in 6 months. The staff member shut up immediately, and Marco walked out, shoulders back, head high. When Vincenzo heard about it later, he didn't say anything, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to pride. His son was coming back. Not the same as before. Changed, harder, but alive. And that was worth more than control. More than authority, more than anything. So I have to ask you, if you were Vincenzo, would you trust her? Knowing she had secrets, knowing she might be connected to your enemies, but also knowing she was the only person who'd reached your child when no one else could. Would you take the risk, or would you cut her loose before it was too late? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you'd do, because the clock was ticking. And in less than 72 hours, that choice would be taken out of Vincenzo's hands. The attack was coming, and when it hit, everyone's true intentions would be revealed. The attack came on a Thursday night. No warning, no chatter on the wires, just the sudden crack of gunfire and shattering glass as armed men breached the compound's east perimeter. Vincenzo's security team responded immediately, but the attackers had planned well. They knew the layout, knew the blind spots, knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum chaos. Vincenzo was in his office when alarms went off. He grabbed his weapon, barked orders into his radio, and ran toward Marco's room. But when he burst through the door, his son wasn't there. Panic flooded his system, the kind he hadn't felt since the night Isabella died. He screamed Marco's name, tore through the hallway, checked every room. Nothing. Then he heard it. The sound of movement in the courtyard. He ran to the window and saw something that stopped his heart. Marco was outside, pressed against the stone wall, breathing hard but controlled. And standing between him and 3 armed mercenaries was Amara. She wasn't hiding, wasn't running. She was moving like a weapon. The first man came at her with a knife. She disarmed him in 2 moves, snapped his wrist, and drove his own blade into his thigh before he could scream. The second raised his gun. She closed the distance faster than Vincenzo thought possible, redirected the barrel, and used the man's own momentum to slam him face first into the courtyard stones. The third hesitated. That hesitation cost him. Amara swept his legs, dropped him hard, and knocked him unconscious with a precise strike to the temple. The entire sequence took less than 15 seconds. Marco watched from the wall, eyes wide but not paralyzed, not frozen. He was doing exactly what she'd taught him, staying low, staying quiet, staying alive. Amara turned to him, blood on her knuckles, breathing steady. "Run to your father, now." Marco ran. Vincenzo caught him at the door, pulled him inside, held him tight. But his eyes stayed locked on Amara as she stood in the courtyard, surrounded by bodies, looking every bit like the soldier he'd suspected she was. When the compound was secured and the last attackers were either dead or restrained, Vincenzo found her in the armory, cleaning blood off her hands. He didn't ask permission, didn't ease into it, just walked up and said, "Who are you?" Amara dried her hands slowly, methodically. Then she rolled up her sleeve and showed him the scar on her wrist, the crescent moon. Clear, undeniable. "I was taken when I was 9, she said, voice flat. "Pulled from my village during a raid. They branded us, trained us, told us we were soldiers, told us we had purpose. For 3 years I believed them. Then I saw what they were really doing. They weren't building an army. They were building slaves. Kids who'd kill on command and die without question. So I ran. And when I got out, I spent the next decade finding other kids like me and getting them out too." Vincenzo's hand tightened around his gun. "You're one of them." "I was. Not anymore." "Then why do you have their mark?" Why are you here?" Amara met his gaze. "Because 6 months ago I heard about a Mafia boss whose son watched his mother die and stopped talking. And I knew that silence. I knew what happens when a child breaks and no one knows how to fix them. So I came. To do what? Save him? To give him what no one gave me, a chance to be strong instead of shattered." Vincenzo's voice cracked. "You could have been sent to kill us." "I could have. But I wasn't. And if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. The truth of that statement hung in the air. She'd had access, opportunity, trust. She could have ended him a dozen times over, but she hadn't. Because she wasn't here for revenge. She was here because she understood what it meant to survive trauma, and she refused to let another child drown in it the way she almost had. Vincenzo's gun lowered. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since Isabella's death, he broke. Not violently, not loudly, just a quiet, devastating collapse of the walls he'd built to keep himself functional. "I couldn't save him," he whispered. "I tried everything, and I couldn't reach him." Amara's voice softened, just slightly. "You loved him. That kept him alive. I just taught him how to stand." Vincenzo looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the scars that went deeper than skin, saw the weight she carried, saw the warrior she'd become not by choice, but by necessity, and he realized something that shook him to his core. She hadn't infiltrated his home to destroy it. She'd walked into his grief and quietly, without asking for anything in return, put his family back together. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it. The compound was repaired within a week. New security protocols implemented. The staff who'd questioned Amara's presence stopped whispering, because the night of the attack they'd all seen what she was capable of. And more importantly, they'd seen Marco survive because of what she'd taught him. Vincenzo didn't promote her, didn't give her a title or a raise or public acknowledgement, but he did something more important. He protected her silence. When his associates asked questions, he shut them down. When rival families tried digging into her background, he made sure trails went cold. She'd saved his son, and in his world, that kind of debt wasn't repaid with money. It was repaid with loyalty. Marco continued training, not every day but regularly, enough to maintain the skills, enough to keep the discipline. But Amara also made sure he had time to be a child again, to play, to laugh, to exist without the weight of survival pressing down on him every second. Slowly, the boy who'd been silent for 6 months became someone new. Not the same kid he'd been before his mother died. That version was gone. But this version was stronger, more grounded, more aware of his own resilience. One morning, about a month after the attack, Marco asked Amara a question. "Why did you stay? You could have left after that night. No one would have stopped you." Amara looked at him, considered her answer carefully. "Because I wanted to make sure you'd be okay. And now you are." "Does that mean you're leaving?" She smiled, just a little. "Not yet. You still drop your left shoulder when you pivot." Marco laughed. Actually laughed. And the sound of it echoed through the courtyard like light breaking through a long darkness. Vincenzo heard it from his office window, and for the first time in a year, he felt something close to peace. He'd learned something Isabella had tried to teach him when she was alive. Power without compassion creates fear, but discipline with care creates strength, real strength, the kind that doesn't just survive attacks, the kind that rebuilds after devastation, the kind that turns broken children into warriors who know when to fight and when to breathe. Amara never told him the full story of her past, never explained every scar or every nightmare, and Vincenzo never pushed, because he understood now that some people carry weight they'll never fully share. And the greatest respect you can offer them is not demanding they unpack it for your comfort. She stayed in the household, not as a maid, not as a guard, just as someone who belonged, someone who'd earned her place not through hierarchy or blood, but through action, through showing up when no one else could, through seeing a child drowning and refusing to look away. The other staff respected her. The security team deferred to her. And Marco, the boy who'd been silent and shattered, looked at her the way children look at people who save their lives without asking for anything in return. Not with debt, with trust. And maybe in a house built on violence and control, that was the most revolutionary thing of all. Someone who had every reason to destroy them, choosing instead to heal. So let me ask you something. What would you have done in Vincenzo's position? If the person who healed your child turned out to have connections to your enemies, would you have pulled the trigger, or would you have given them a chance to explain? And here's the harder question. How many people in your own life have you misjudged because you didn't know their full story? How many times have you looked at someone's scars and assumed weakness when what you were really seeing was survival? Amara didn't save Marco because she owed anyone anything. She saved him because she knew what it felt like to be broken, and she refused to let another child suffer that way if she could stop it. That's not heroism. That's humanity. And maybe the lesson here isn't about mafia bosses or child soldiers or violence. Maybe it's about recognizing that the people who save us aren't always the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the ones we overlook, the ones we underestimate, the ones we almost throw away before realizing what they're really worth. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Because the world is full of invisible warriors, people carrying weight you'll never see, fighting battles you'll never know about, and their stories deserve to be told. Comment below and tell me, have you ever had someone show up in your life exactly when you needed them? Someone who saw your pain and didn't run from it? I want to hear your stories. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because sometimes the greatest act of strength isn't fighting back. It's choosing to help someone else stand when you barely know how to stand yourself. Don't miss the next story. Hit subscribe. And remember, you never know who's watching. You never know whose life you might change just by showing up.